Good afternoon, Jim Brett here at the New England Council. I'm delighted to welcome you to the second installment of the Council's newest event series, Inside the Corner Office. It's hard to believe it's already October, and it's a big month here at the New England Council. In addition to today's program, we're also looking forward to a Capitol Hill report on October 15th with the chairman of the House Rules Committee, Congressman Jim McGovern. And of course, our biggest and most important event of the year is just about 2 weeks away. Our 2021 annual celebration will be presented virtually on Monday, October 18th at 4 p.m. We hope you'll join us as we honor an historic all-female group of New Englanders of the Year. And we are very grateful to the dozens of council members who have already stepped up as sponsors of the program. If you're interested in sponsoring, there are still some opportunities, so please contact us for further information. Last month, we kicked off this new Inside the Corner Office series with a very engaging and informative conversation with Tom Bartlett, the CEO of American Tower Corporation. I know I learned a lot and really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope those of you who tuned in did as well. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Badar, the president of National Grid US, as our second guest. National Grid is one of our region's largest utilities, providing the safe and reliable natural gas and electricity to over 20 million residential and commercial customers in the Northeast. In fact, I would venture a guess that many of you watching today are yourselves National Grid customers. Badar joined National Grid in 2017 as Group Director, Corporate Development and President of National Grid Ventures. He was named President of the U.S. Business in April 2020. And over the past year and a half, he's focused on driving the company's vision, exceeding customer expectation, and making the energy systems of tomorrow possible. Throughout his career, he's been a leader in the restructuring of the retail and the wholesale power markets in both the United States and the UK. He's a graduate of Brunel University in London and received his MBA from the University of Pennsylvania. Badar, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Well, as I mentioned, you've been with National Grid since 2017. Just tell us a little more about your professional background and career path before joining the company.
Yeah, happy to do that. My first job was with Jaguar Cars in the UK. I was on a graduate rotation program. I loved it. Through those rotations, I think I saw more breadth over an 18-month period than I could ever have done otherwise. I'm a big fan of those programs. I think it's actually up to employers to do everything they can to keep those young folks because I think they should go on to become their future leaders. I didn't stay with JAG. I actually went into consulting for a few years, which is also good because I saw a diverse set of industries and challenges. I think the most formative experience, Jim, in my career was at an energy startup that I joined and helped to run actually here in Boston soon after business school. I left a relatively low risk blue chip consulting gig for a high risk startup that had no customers, no revenue when I joined, and it was still raising money. I was there for about 3 years. We grew rapidly, we shrunk, we grew again, and then we ran out of money and we sold it off. I think I learned more in those 3 years than any other 3-year period before or since. And I think there's just 3 things I'd call out. First is that startups don't usually have a lot of money, and they're pretty short in resource. So you have to learn to make decisions without perfect information. You learn pretty quickly how to separate the noise from what's important because you have to. You can't afford to waste time or money boiling the ocean. Second, we made a ton of mistakes. Mistakes are when people learn the most. The key is making sure you've got a culture where you can institutionalize learning from mistakes rather than looking for people to blame, which kills creativity and innovation. Third thing is resilience. We made so many mistakes, but like a baby when they fall down, or a kid that fails their school test, you have to learn to pick yourself up. I think in today's world, where the environment is less and less predictable, the value of resilience as a leadership attribute is greater, I think, than it's ever been. Someone once said to me that leadership is like a tea bag. You don't know how good it is until you put it in hot water. There was a lot of hot water, for me at that startup back then. I learned how to lead a group of people through, a lot of hot water. That startup experience actually gave me I was young, I was in my like late 20s, early 30s, gave me the confidence to do what I did next, which was join another energy company that I was with for almost 15 years. That was before I joined Grid. Most of that time was in Houston, in Texas. It was a company that I joined the management team of and ultimately became CEO. We grew it 20-fold in revenue, from $1 billion to $20 billion over that 15-year period. Did a lot of growth, organic, entering new markets, segments, and products. A lot of inorganic growth. Did over 30 acquisitions, and I learned a lot. Two things that I'd bring out. First is that executing strategy is never a straight line. I think it's very important to have a North Star, but I think it's equally important to know that you're going to have to pivot. And so you need to know, how and when to do that. If you're too slow or you're too late. If you're too fast or you pivot too frequently, you lose your people. The second thing I learned is when I left, actually. In many ways, I professionally grew up at that company, and I was very hands-on with everyone on the projects and all the deals we did. In the farewell messages and toasts that I got when I left, I expected people to talk about the projects we worked on or all the achievements that we worked on together. In fact, no one talked about any of that. The only thing that people talked about was how they felt when we worked together. My wife and I had our third and youngest kid, our youngest son, a little before that. We got two older kids, a little bit older, who were still in the house. So I kind of looked back and forth between the older two and the younger one, and realized that they were babies. And I, like probably many people on this call, was very focused on achievements, very focused on achieving my goals, and probably missed, a good part of their growing up. All of that is to say that I learned the lesson that I think everyone tells us over and over, which is to savor the moments. We can get so busy achieving our goals that we forget that, yes, goals are important. It's also important to enjoy the ride. Life is about the journey as much as it is about goals. And that brings me to Boston and National Grid. As you said, I've been here for 4.5 years. I've been, for most of that time, running our clean energy and innovation efforts globally, and for the last 1.5 years, running our US utilities. And I'm delighted to be here.
Your background indicates that you've always been known as somebody who empowers your team. And that's probably why they mentioned that at your farewell, how you just brought them together as a team to achieve the great successes that you have. But I remember reading something about you early on in your career that you said you really had no career goal. What guided you was two things. One, do I enjoy what I'm doing? And then two, am I learning something? Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I think that the enjoyment, we spend all our lives at work. We spend so much of our time with the people that we work with. And so, I say that to actually all the sort of young folks I talk with today, that those are the two things that matter. Are you enjoying what you're doing? And that isn't about everybody else making you happy. It's not about everybody else. It's actually on you. Are you doing what you can to create an environment that's enjoyable for yourself and for others? And the second thing is learning. I think that when certainly I've made a number of decisions in my career where I've chosen a path that has likely to give me more learning than another path that I might have been on. And I think that's been a tremendously fulfilling experience. I think that the human brain has the capacity to take on more and more than we realize. And it's up to us to continue to do that. And I think when leaders do that, when people become, leading an organization that's got learning in its DNA, I think it's able to do more things because you're collectively learning from each other. And that's why I love the idea of you got to fall down, scratch your knees, because that's how you'll learn.
I don't know if it's true, but somebody wrote that your wife sometimes thinks you have an antenna on the top of your head because you're always listening and absorbing. Is that true?
I've actually, I wondered whether I have any good ideas myself.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that I'm contributing? And I think that some of the things that I contribute is that I suck in, I learn from everybody around me. I learn from people above me, around me, below me, anyone I try to anyway, folks I come into contact with. And that's the inbound radar. And I think that what I do is try and bring ideas together, as opposed to, and I think everyone brings something different to the table. I think what I bring is the ability to bring people together.
Mm-hmm. We were talking before we went on about your experience in being raised in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and grew up through a period that was just tumultuous, to say the least. Can you just share a little bit more about that experience and how that has impacted on your career?
Yeah. So I grew up in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, in the 70s and 80s. That was a time where, Jim, honestly, fear and what we would call intolerance today. I don't think we used that word back then, but that they were present in life, as were bombs and a military presence. I've joked before, I used to watch Starsky and Hutch as a kid. Many people probably did. That was total fiction to me, but I didn't realize that police cars could look anything other than an armored vehicle with a guy on top with a gun, right? Because that's all I knew. It was only when I left over 30 years ago now that I fully realized how not normal all of that was. It was a deeply divided society, and yet, from a distance, if you're 1,000 miles away or several hundred miles away, people aren't that different, actually. Because of that experience, I actually learned that there are many more things that bind us together than there are things that tear us apart. I think the biggest way it's shaped my career is that, as I said before, I look for common ground. Anytime I see two sides or two groups of people that are far apart, I look for ways to bring people together. I tend not to dig in to whatever position I have and keep an open mind. And I think that's because I've seen some of the worst outcomes of being too rigid.
Mm-hmm. As you indicated earlier, you've moved around an awful lot in your life, I believe, in London and Belfast and Houston and Philadelphia and Hartford area and now Boston. And I'm told that you've chosen to live here, which as a lifetime Bostonian, I'd love to hear that. But what attracted you to this area?
Yeah, I mean, there were, I was in Philadelphia before I moved to Boston. I was at business school. I think there were a lot of there were preconceived ideas I had about Boston before I'd even visited. I grew up, as we discussed, in Northern Ireland, and so I thought the Irish connection would be good. It's about the closest part in the U.S. to the UK, which is where the rest of my family is. But quite honestly, those two factors sort of fell down the list or dropped off the list. Boston and New England in general, I think, is just an area of so much natural beauty. This weekend I'll be going out apple picking for the third time. I think I've got another one after that. And that's not because I have a particular fondness for apples. I mean, I know more than anybody else.
Yeah.
But it's just so nice to be out and about. I was in Houston for about 8 years before coming to Boston. There's great things about Houston, Texas, but I think natural beauty is probably not one of them. We have 4 seasons here. Each one offers something special. In Houston, there are two seasons, hot and very hot. As a family, we got into the point where we would travel a lot over the summers, I think to escape the Houston heat. This past year, we didn't do much traveling. I think not many people were, but we did discover the Cape and spent most of the summer there, and it was wonderful. I think, Jim, the other thing I'd say about New England, I think maybe Boston specifically, is that at least what we found is that there are so many people here doing worthy, noble, very purposeful things in their lives, giving back to their communities, trying to make a difference, a positive impact in the world. And I don't think that exists everywhere. I think it's really refreshing. I think it's a great environment and atmosphere for our kids. I don't know if it's the sign of the times or, the age or stage our kids are at, but they seem to be more socially and environmentally conscious here than they were before. And I am very, very happy about that.
Just shifting gears, let's take a little time to talk about some of your National Grid's top priorities and initiatives. Climate change and the road to net zero are top priorities for you and for National Grid. And I know you've called these next 10 years the critical decade in this important work. So can you just update us on the company's work to decarbonize the energy supply for the region?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, I think, one of our most important priority. I think for us, it starts with a clear goal of emissions reduction. So we talk about net zero by 2050. For our own operations, we've actually lowered our emissions 75% versus 1990 levels. But you're right, I actually talk about this next decade. We talk about this next decade. I think there's no point talking about 2050 unless you've made huge progress in this next decade. Last year, we published a responsible business report and a 10-point plan for what we needed to do, reduce our own emissions, but also actually our role in enabling society-wide emissions that we call Scope 3 emissions. And I'd break it down into three sectors: energy supply, transportation, and building heat. I'll just cover each of them kind of one by one. For energy supply, we need to decarbonize energy supply. We aren't actually a generator here in New England. We are a transporter of electricity to customers, but we need to decarbonize energy supply as a society and get to at least 80%. For us, that means interconnecting renewables, offshore, onshore, and helping customers use less energy. On offshore wind, we've got to interconnect a huge amount of offshore wind to the grid from practically zero today. We've signed in the last couple of years, last 2 or 3 years, contracts with renewable generators, so folks that are building the renewable generation offshore, to supply roughly half of our Massachusetts and Rhode Island customers' load with renewable supply by the mid-2020s when that comes online. Onshore, we've connected about 100,000 distributed solar systems in our states, and we need to double that by 2030 in Massachusetts. For energy efficiency, we do a lot of work helping our customers make their homes and buildings more energy efficient. In the last 8 or 9 years, we've invested over $4 billion helping them do that. But we have to double the rate of energy efficiency retrofits that we're doing by 2030 from where we are today. That's energy supply. For transportation, again, to meet our state's goals and the pathways that we think are needed, we need about 1.2 million electric vehicles on the roads in our states by 2025. And we think that probably needs to be around 3 million by 2030. That's up from 100,000 today. It's a 30-fold increase. We don't make the cars, obviously. Our role is to build the infrastructure that allows all these vehicles to be charged. So we've installed 3,000 charging ports already. We've got support from a regulator in New York for 16,000 more, and we're working with our regulator in Massachusetts for another over 30,000. We're also converting our entire passenger fleet to electric, which is around 5% today. The last sector is buildings and building heat. We need to convert pretty much all of the Northeast's 5 million oil heated buildings to cleaner solutions. That's ourselves and other utilities. For buildings that heat with natural gas today, which is the vast majority, as we know, we've got to find a way to transition away from geologic natural gas to zero or low carbon renewable gas or hydrogen. So that's a lot. That's a lot to do over the next decade, and that's why we talk about it, and I talk about it as the critical decade. I think one thing that's different in this next decade is the role of the consumer. When I look at the last decade, we've actually seen emissions reduction as a result of the actions actually from a relatively small number of actors. This next decade, we need consumers, regular people, to be much more engaged, making choices that they're really not making today in much greater numbers. And that's not just an energy supply, it's across all aspects of their lives, from the cars we drive, installing something at our homes, how we cook our food, to how we heat our homes. That's once and done, making a decision to buy a car or install something at your home. But over time, I think it's important that people are engaging with those things on a more regular basis. So, for example, charging your car at different times of the day, changing where you charge your car because it's cheaper at a different location, which might be different on different days. And I don't think that we'll achieve all of that engagement through penalties and incentives, or carrots or sticks. I think we need people to want to make different choices. I think they have to be easy to make, and they got to be more cost effective. I think we play a role, National Grid, but I do believe that we need, consumer-oriented technology or entrepreneurial companies to help get us there. In this transition, I don't think that any one company will be able to make that transition on their own. When I look at the entrepreneurial sort of startup world, a lot of what they do is collaborate and work with others. And for us, when we think about this transition, we also agree that collaboration is such an important part of it. And that's one of the reasons we, a few years ago now, created what we call National Grid Partners, which is our corporate venture capital and innovation arm. We've allocated $400 million of shareholder funds, which makes it the single largest utility corporate venture fund in the world. We've made over 30 investments. These are minority investments in energy and technology, entrepreneurs, younger folks, in things like AI, analytics, IoT, sensors, smart grid, grid optimization. These aren't just financial investments, but they're also strategic investments that help us see and shape what that world is, where our consumers are significantly more engaged. And that requires us, for a regulated utility, that requires us to think about not just the substance of the innovation, but also the innovation process. How do you test your ideas early and frequently with your customers and pivot? I think in a regulated utility context where we sometimes need to lay out for our regulators what and when and where we're doing and spending money before we spend anything. I think that that's a hard thing to do. So the need is, we need to not just work on the innovation, but also the process of innovation. I think that's a really important part of what has to happen over the next decade.
You already mentioned that National Grid has made a significant investment in the electric transport, some $200 million to build the ultimate 19,000 charging stations here in the region. What more do you think can be done to encourage the adoption of this green technology? You already touched on a little, but I'm sure there's much more.
Absolutely. Transportation, it is a huge source of emissions. Actually, in our region, so in the Northeast, transportation emissions are around 40% of total emissions, Jim. So it's a big priority. Getting getting emissions out, getting electric vehicles on the roads is important. People aren't going to do that unless they know that they can charge their vehicles, when they want, where they want. So we need to work with other utilities, charging station companies, automakers, policymakers, regulators, to help customers make that decision and take that anxiety, off their minds. Customers tell us that access to charging, not just at their home, but actually at all, across their lives is important. So public charging, especially fast charging, access to home and workplace, these are important. So what are we doing? Well, we've got a comprehensive program to deploy these EV chargers, which I talked about. That's for commercial customers, for fleet customers, for residential customers. We are actually also piloting off-peak charging solutions for our residential customers so they can charge at the lowest time and also do it at a time that creates the least stress for us. For our fleet customers, we have a fleet advisory service that helps our commercial customers, develop a roadmap for converting their trucks and buses to vehicles, electric vehicles. It also gives our engineers better visibility to where that concentrated load could come on. But I think we need to, there's a few other things we need to see. We need to see the costs come down. We need to see battery costs decline to about a third of where they are today. If I look at the last decade, I'm pretty confident we'll get there. We need a bigger range of vehicles, particularly more affordable, vehicles. I think that's happening already. I think every month you see another announcement from a car company on what they're doing. I think we need, more transparency on the total cost of ownership. So, I don't think that's fully understood, the cost of the car and then the ongoing running of the car versus filling it up with gas. But again, I think all of these things are solvable. I do think, though, that we need policy coordination and incentives at the state and federal level. I think if we don't, we run the risk of having, really an inequitable future. We'll get a patchwork of access where, folks that can afford it get it. Remote, rural, economically disadvantaged communities, could be left out. And so I think that is a really important part of the equation here. We're a regulated utility. We don't choose our customers. We serve everyone. So it's an important goal for us to ensure that everyone gets the benefits, not just of cleaner air through transportation electrification, but in this clean energy transition altogether.
Next month, National Grid will be participating in the COP26 UN Annual Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, Scotland. Tell us a little more about National Grid's role in the conference and what do you hope comes out of this important international gathering? Yeah.
I mean, we were a headline sponsor, actually, Jim, at Climate Week, New York City last week. And as you say, we're a principal partner at COP26 in Glasgow. We believe, and I've just talked about it, I think we play a hugely important role, in our regions, in enabling this transition. And so at both events, we're talking about the things that we're doing. But I actually also believe that to achieve our goals, I talked about collaboration earlier. I think that, we've got to partner with others, not just in our own industry, but across sectors. I think these events are an opportunity for people to come together, realize that we've got the same goals and find ways to work on them. So what do I hope comes out of it? I think two things. First is that we increase the sense of urgency. There was a UN report that came out about a month or two ago over the summer that talked about a code red for humanity. It was talking about the projections around warming the planet. This week, there was a Washington Post article that said that the average 6-year-old, which is the age of our youngest, will live through 3 times as many climate disasters as their grandparents. I think that you got to be living under a rock to not see the increasing number of storms, floods, extreme weather that we're seeing not just here but around the world. So that's one. Second is that I think it's really important that we ensure that there's nobody left behind in this transition. I think in societal transformations, there's we sometimes find that there's a segment of society left behind, and we can't allow that to happen this time around.
Over the last couple of years, we've seen a long overdue focus on racial inequities in our country. And many large employers have really taken a look at diversity and inclusion within their own workforce. I know this has been a top priority for National Grid. Can you just tell us some of the steps the company has taken and the impact they've had?
Jim, I think it is a huge area of focus for us. And, I think, as you said, I think it's long overdue. I think that for me personally, and I know for many others, this pandemic has impacted us in so many different ways. But hopefully we're kind of coming out of it. But I'd say that as we come out of it, certainly for me, I have a better sense of what's important and what actually isn't so important. And I think this is one of the most important things. We've had this has been National Inclusion Week here at our company, and we've had folks come in from outside our company talking about how the pandemic has impacted people. And what we found is, not a surprise that certain communities, Black and brown communities, have been disproportionately impacted. So it's a huge priority. I would say that, I find myself, never in a discussion any longer or a debate about the value of diversity. I think the business case has been proven over and over again. At National Grid, we say and we believe that our workforce should reflect the diversity of the communities we serve. And we've been saying that for years, for many years. This past year, we started publishing our employee diversity numbers by gender, and not just sort of diverse as a heading, but specific ethnicity groups by level. So depend your seniority, how diverse, and the level of the gender diversity. And we were comparing ourselves to our communities. I haven't seen that kind of transparency in any company I've worked for. And every quarter, I feel both pride that we have the courage to bear it all, but also pain, because it is plain to see that we've got a long way to go. But I think that people say if you don't measure it, you won't improve it. Last year, as a company, we set out a set of commitments in our responsible business charter. So commitments around targets for diversity levels in our senior leadership, in our incoming talent programs. This year, we've incorporated some of those into our bonus calculations for our senior leaders. So I think that's good. I think all those things are good. But I think we also know that if we don't have an inclusive culture, it doesn't matter how diverse we are if that diversity isn't heard. And so over the last year, we had more inclusion training at senior, mid-management levels than anything I can remember, other than maybe safety, which is obviously a huge priority for our company. We've had structured sessions, starting with our top 100 leaders and through 1,500 middle managers across the company. I wasn't here at Grid years and years before, but I know that we went on a journey around a stronger safety culture. And one of those things was we'd start meetings, big meetings, town halls, executive meetings with offsites with a safety moment. I think a lot of energy companies like us do that today. Today, most of our meetings, those kinds of large meetings, start with both a safety moment and an inclusion moment. I think that to create culture change, you've got to look for big symbolic moves as well as little things to make an impact. And we've done a lot of things over the last couple of years. There are just two, I guess I'd call out just two specific things. We hired a dedicated chief diversity officer from outside the industry. She brings just a ton of energy, knowledge, wisdom. I think we're lucky to have her. And through her leadership, we've tripled the size of our relatively small DEI team to do all the programming. Second thing that I think we realize is that this isn't just about a small sort of central team doing a bunch of work. We've got a dozen employee resource groups, so ERGs, across our business. These are employee-led, employee-run. They're often actually middle or junior level people, and they're doing a great job promoting inclusion and diversity in their affinity groups. We realized we could do a better job if we fully supported them, making sure they've got an executive sponsor, an executive ally, they've got a budget, a proper level of resources. We're ensuring that they're learning from each other, and that the folks doing the work, and they do that work at nights and weekends, are properly recognized and rewarded. This is a big priority for me. I could talk about it for another 20 minutes, but I'll stop at this point.
That's all part of your environmental justice program that you have there at the grid.
That's
and
right.
You should be congratulated for it. Finally, I just wanted to use a little time to talk about what's going on in Washington and some of your National Grid's federal legislative priorities. Needless to say, we've all been closely watching. I was up late last night myself. The progress in Congress, or the lack of progress last night, passing that once in a generation $1 trillion infrastructure package. Of course, there are a number of provisions in that bill aimed at advancing clean energy technologies. Are there particular elements of that bill that are top priorities for grid? And can you speak to the potential impact of some of these investments?
Yeah, look, I think that federal support for infrastructure to mitigate the impacts of climate change is essential if we're going to achieve our goals. There are 4 or 5 areas that I think that we are focused on, that our company is focused on, and I'll talk about them, and then just talk about the bipartisan bill in a second. For us, we got to modernize the grid. We got to find ways to invest in innovative technology to optimize the grid, accommodate all that we call it distributed resources, so solars and battery and electric vehicles, two-way flow of power, charging and discharging. So there's a modernize the grid investment category. We've got investment to connect the supply. That's what we have to do. So there's actually a significant amount of transmission and distribution investment that we need to invest in to connect all of this new supply that's onshore and offshore. And actually that's important because the lead times for that are sometimes longer than generation. We've got to build out the infrastructure for electric vehicles we talked about. We've got to get, invest in resilience for the storms we talked about. Also R&D. There are technologies today that are important for getting to our goals over the next 10, 20, 30 years, but they're not at scale and they're not at cost. They haven't gotten down the cost curves. We need to find ways to invest in those technologies. So green hydrogen specifically, long duration storage, carbon capture are some things. And so those are the things that I think are important for our business. When I look at the Senate bipartisan bill, it includes, many of these things at relatively modest levels. So, $7.5 billion for EV charging stations, $9.5 billion for EV buses, $50 billion for resilience, $20 billion for environmental remediation, just over $70 billion for the power infrastructure, including that R&D. So we are supportive of the bipartisan package. We think it contains investment proposals that are needed and necessary, and I think they will go some way towards what needs to be done that I've talked about to get to the emissions reduction goals that we need by 2030.
The other major piece of legislation, I'm sure you've been watching closely, is the budget reconciliation package, which also includes a variety of measures aimed at achieving net zero emissions by 2050. What are some of the items in that package that you're most interested in?
Well, I mean, that package includes just a lot from childcare to kind of education,
Mhm.
healthcare, which I know there's lots of debate on.
Right.
But you're right. It includes significantly more funding for climate change mitigation, about $750 billion more, to advance all of the things that actually we just talked about. So clean energy supply, transportation, grid modernization, resilience, building efficiency, as well as that R&D. And I think to accelerate these technologies, I think that all of these things are important. When I look at the size of the challenge ahead and what's in the bipartisan bill, I don't think that's enough. I think we need more. I think the funding that's in the reconciliation package, we can debate whether we need all of it, but I don't think that we have enough in the bipartisan bill in order to meet our goals, and that's how we see it.
Great. Well, I'm afraid our time is up. This has been a very enlightening conversation. I want to thank you, Badar, for taking the time to join us today. We wish you luck in apple picking. Stay close to the organic apples. They are the best, and they taste absolutely delicious. I want to thank, again, National Grid, not only for being here today, but being such a great and advocate, engaged member of the New England Council. We talked earlier. John O'Brien from National Grid is now a new member representing the grid on the board here at the New England Council. And we just want to say thank you for all of the support you've given us over the years. Our next Inside the Corner Office program scheduled for November 9th. Our guest will be Vicki Spurl, the CEO of the New England Aquarium. Watch for that invitation early next week. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and have a safe and a great weekend. This has been great, Bud. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. That was enjoyable. Hope that was good for your folks.
Great. Are you going to be in